in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the American military that is engorged even aside from and besides those wars. But secondly,
which is the same
question
agenda.
is indeed, how do you create a mass movement? How do you create a social movement? And what I said is what I think needs to happen. Mosques, churches, synagogues, and yes, feminists and students and so on ought to be gathering around a demand that the United States government insist on the Palestinian independence on the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, all of it, in approximately the 1967 boundaries, and a full peace treaty for Israel with the Arab states. That is an ethical demand. It doesn't demonize anybody. It ends the oppression of the occupation.
But you're ignoring the majority of the Palestinians.
Well,
you're ignoring the majority of the
Palestinians.
I'd like to ask Rabbi Waskow, the issue of Israel is obviously worried about this delegitimization campaign, and one of the Israeli think tanks, Ruit, issued a whole analysis and a strategy for combating it, and it talked about the fact that generally Israel has concentrated on state-to-state relations to achieve its ends. Here in the United States, you say that we should be focusing, or that the people should be focusing on affecting government policy. But isn't the fact that both the Democrats and Republican parties, virtually all of the leadership of both parties, has lined up for decades behind Israeli policy, indicate that perhaps a different direction, a civil society approach, as this one represented by the BDS campaign, is a new way to go, and that precisely it's the fact that it is a non-state movement that is developing under BDS that has some sections of Israeli society worried about its effectiveness.
No, that's not the reason. They're upset because there is some organizing going on. I assure you that if in American cities, mosques, churches, and synagogues together said, we are going to demand that our members of Congress insist, and the president insist, on a full peace treaty for an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel and a full peace treaty with the rest of the Arab world, that the present Israeli government would be a great deal more scared, and the Israeli people would become excited at the idea of, at last, a peace treaty that ended the pressures on Israel, with the only trade-off, and for many Israelis it would be a good trade-off, being getting off the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And in the American Jewish community, which has been hostile to any kind of arrangement that the Israeli government didn't like, such an approach, which included a full peace treaty for Israel as well as a full peace treaty with Palestine, that would appeal to a huge proportion of the American Jewish community. And organizations that didn't support it would fall into line or would fall apart as a result. It's the social, I agree about the social movement being necessary, but it's not going to get there by BDS. It's going to get there by targeting the most important target, the government of the United States.
Barghouti, your response?
Yeah, well, first, it is happening. I mean, the rabbi is denying that this is happening. BDS is indeed spreading tremendously. We have major support from large trade unions in Britain, Norway, Spain, France, Italy, and many, many countries, Canada, of course. And increasingly, it's entering the United States slower than the rest of the Western world. But it's happening. There's a huge movement supporting BDS that includes several Jewish groups, and that's being ignored. There's a disproportionately high number of Jewish, conscientious Jewish citizens of the Western countries that are not just acting, but leading some BDS movements around the Western world. But again, let's go back to the issue. This is not just about ending the occupation. There are three basic rights for the Palestinian people. The majority of the Palestinians happen to be not in the occupied Palestinian territories. They happen to be refugees, ethnically cleansed during the creation of the State of Israel in and after 1948. These are completely ignored in reducing Palestinian rights to self-determination to simply ending the occupation will not do. This is simply unacceptable. We have to address Israeli apartheid. the system of racial discrimination, and we have to address the UN-sanctioned rights of the refugees. But the most critical issue to address now, not strategically, now, is ending the siege of Gaza. There's a criminal siege of Gaza. The Goldstone report, the UN Rapporteur for Human Rights, all of them described the war crimes committed by Israel in Gaza, and the siege is certainly a big form of collective punishment, which is a crime against humanity. People are dying, real people are dying. This is not an abstract notion. The siege must end. So we're reaching a stage where Israel is committing slow acts of genocide against 1.5 million Palestinians in Gaza. This is extremely critical, and it demands people of conscience around the world to act, and act very effectively. And the BDS movement offers them an empowering, non-violent tool through which they can impact policy in the US, in the Western world, and certainly in Israel.
Do you feel, Rabbi Arthur Waskow, there's a point, Rabbi Waskow, is there a point that you would support, a point at which you would support BDS? What do you think has to get worse?
No, it's not a matter of what has to get worse. The question is how to end the worse. And I don't think BDS is going to end it. And if BDS spreads in Western Europe, it isn't going to matter. It's the United States that has the actual power to make a difference. And BDS is not going to engage enough of the American population to matter. What is going to matter is the structure of American military aid and the structure of American diplomacy toward Israel, toward Egypt, toward the Arab world. That's what matters. And BDS in Western Europe is not going to matter. So it's not a matter of what gets worse. It's a matter of how to end the worst. And I say again, yes, there needs to be a social movement. There now is in the Jewish community, there's not only J Street having absorbed and empowered the folks of Brit Tzedek v'Shalom. There is also movement inside the Reform Jewish movement. There is movement among Jews who, in theory, are unaffiliated but care about this issue and who feel unrepresented by most of the American Jewish established institutions. That's where the change has to include. And along with that, it has to include the Protestant and Catholic churches. It has to include Islam in America. And the working together is what's going to make the difference. Well, those are the only Americans aside, I guess, from the big oil who care about the Middle East.
We're going to have to leave it there for now. We want to thank Rabbi Arthur Waskow, founder and director of the Shalom Center, and Omar Barghouti, who is one of the founding members of the BDS campaign, the Boycott, Divest From, and Sanction Israel campaign.
Shalom and salam and peace to all of us.
Thank you. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. Back in a minute.